Oh, hi. Something different? Well, it turns out barber shops are closed, and I was left to my own devices, and now I look different. But, moving on. I thought we could do a read aloud, even though we're not in the same classroom together. We're going to be looking at Frindle. I really like this book. It's by Andrew Clements. I like it because it's funny, but also gets you guys thinking about what makes words and where they come from. I'm sure based off the title, you're kind of wondering what a frindle is. I'm not going to read the blurb for you. I think it gives too much away, but I'm wondering if you can use any clues you see on the cover to kind of figure out what you think a frindle could mean. Okay, so we're going to look at chapter 1 today. And before I do, I want to think about all that I know about fiction to kind of ready my mind for what I'm going to be reading about. So thinking about the characteristics of fiction, the elements of fiction. I know I'm going to see characters. And when I'm thinking about characters, there's a few things I want to remember. Characters have traits, things that are kind of more permanent about who they are as a human being, as a person. Then they have emotions. Those kind of come and go, right? A character might be excited one minute and sad the next. Characters also have a motive. A motive is what they want. Maybe something they want to obtain or something they want to accomplish, a goal. Besides characters, we also have a setting. Remember, a setting is when and where the story could take place. And we also have a problem and a solution. Now, the events of the story kind of take us up that plot mountain as we get closer to our problem getting worse and our turning point. And then the events take us back down to get us to the solution. So I'm keeping all that in mind as I'm entering into this book, and I'm kind of thinking about what happens in fiction so I can make predictions and understand the book the best way that Andrew Clements wanted us to understand it. All right, so let's start chapter 1. Chapter 1 is titled Nick. Okay, maybe an important character. Let's find out. If you ask the kids and the teachers at Lincoln Elementary School to make 3 lists, all the really good kids, all the really bad kids, and all the really smart kids, Nick Allen would not be any of them. Nick deserved a list all of his own, and everyone knew it. Was Nick a troublemaker? Hard to say. One thing's for sure, Nick Allen had plenty of ideas, and he knew what to do with them. One time in 3rd grade, Nick decided to turn Mrs. Deaver's room into a tropical island. What kid in New Hampshire isn't ready for a little summer in February? So first he got everyone to make small palm trees out of green and brown construction paper and taped them onto the corners of each desk. Miss Deaver had only been a teacher for about 6 months, and she was delighted. That's so cute! The next day, all the girls wore paper flowers in their hair, and all the boys wore sunglasses and beach hats. Miss Deaver clapped her hands and said, "It's so colorful!" I like Mrs. Deaver. I like how she's encouraging the kids' creativity. I wonder, though, if Nick is going to see a teacher somewhere in this story that doesn't really like his big ideas. The day after that, Nick turned the classroom thermostat up to about 90 degrees with a little screwdriver he had brought from home. All the kids changed into shorts and t-shirts with no shoes. And when Miss Deaver left the room for a minute, Nick spread about 10 cups of fine white sand all over the classroom floor. Miss Deaver was surprised again at just how creative her students can be. But the sand got tracked out into the hallway, where Manny the custodian did not think it was creative at all, and he stomped right down to the office. The principal followed the trail of sand, and when she arrived, Miss Deaver was teaching the hula to some kids near the front of the room, and a tall, thin, shirtless boy with chestnut hair was just spiking a Nerf volleyball over a net made from 6 t-shirts tied together. I wonder which boy we're talking about with the chestnut hair. The 3rd grade trip to the South Seas ended suddenly. The 3rd grade trip to the South Seas ended suddenly. I'm stopping because I'm a little confused. Because one minute I know the students are in a classroom, and now they're saying they were on a trip to the South Seas. I know sea is like a synonym for ocean, right? Maybe what the author means, Andrew Clements, is they were using their imagination to kind of go to a more tropical place, a tropical destination, like a beach, when really they were just in the classroom. I know many of you probably have done something similar at home or at school, at the playground, where you're using your imagination to pretend that you're in a different situation than you may actually be in. Okay, now that I understand what Andrew Clements meant, I'm going to move on. But that didn't stop Nick from trying to liven things up. Lincoln Elementary needed a good jolt once in a while, and Nick was just the guy to deliver it. About a year later, okay, so we're going ahead in the timeline. We're going ahead a year. It's important to notice when the author transitions us. So now we're a year ahead. Nick made the great blackbird discovery. One night he learned on a TV show that red-winged blackbirds give this high-pitched chirp when a hawk or some other danger comes near. Because of the way sound travels, the hunter birds can tell where the high-pitched chirp is coming from. It's interesting. I don't know why Andrew Clements is telling us about kind of like nonfiction facts about a bird right now. I'm wondering if those facts about the chirp are going to come into play with something that Nick decides to do. The next day, during silent reading, Nick glanced at his teacher, and he noticed that Mrs. Avery's nose was curved, kind of like the beak of a hawk. So Nick let out a high, squeaky, blackbird peep. Mrs. Avery jerked her head up from her book and looked around. She couldn't tell who did it, so she just said, "Shh," to the whole class. A minute later, Nick did it again. Louder. Peep! This time there was a little giggle from the class, but Mrs. Avery pretended not to hear the sound. And about 15 seconds later, she slowly stood up and walked to the back of the classroom. Without taking his eyes off of his book, and without moving at all, Nick put his heart and his soul into the highest, most annoying chirp of all. Mrs. Avery pounced. "Janet Fisk, you stop that this instant!" Janet, who was sitting 4 rows away from Nick, promptly turned white, then bright crimson. Crimson. I'm wondering if I can think of a synonym to put in its place. I'm going to have to use the context to understand. She turned bright white after the teacher called her out for something she didn't do. Now she's turning crimson. What's a color people turn when maybe they're embarrassed or they feel like people are looking at them? I'm wondering if crimson could be a synonym for red. And I think it is. But it was taking in the whole event of what was going on that helped me get to that synonym. So she's turning red because she's feeling embarrassed. Now I got to find my spot again. Here we go. But it wasn't me, honest. There was a catch in Janet's voice as she was about to cry. Miss Avery knew she had made a mistake, and so she apologized to Janet. "But someone is asking for big trouble," said Mrs. Avery, looking more like a hawk every minute. Nick kept reading, and he didn't make a peep. At lunchtime, Nick talked to Janet. He felt bad that Mrs. Avery had pounced on her. Janet lived in Nick's neighborhood, and sometimes they played together. She was good at baseball, and she was better at soccer than most of the kids in the whole school, boys and girls. Nick said, "Hey, Janet, I'm sorry you got yelled at during reading. It was my fault. I was the one that made that sound." "You did?" said Janet. "But how come Miss Avery thought it was me?" Nick told her about the blackbirds, and Janet thought it was pretty interesting. Then she tried making a peep or two, and Janet's chirps were even higher and squeakier than Nick's. She promised to keep everything a secret. For the rest of Nick's 4th grade year, at least once a week, Mrs. Avery heard a loud peep from somewhere in the classroom. Sometimes it was a high-pitched chirp. Sometimes it was a very high-pitched chirp. Mrs. Avery never figured out who was making that sound, and gradually she trained herself to ignore it. But she still looked like a hawk. To Nick, the whole thing was just one long and successful science experiment, and Janet Fisk enjoyed it too. Okay, so that's the end of our first chapter. We learned a lot about Nick in this chapter. He's very creative. He takes ideas that he learns from the world, and he kind of puts them to use. But he also kind of does it where it could cause some problems. We noticed that the custodian didn't like all the sand that had to be picked up. And we noticed Miss Avery, the new teacher, isn't really enjoying the bird noises. So maybe he kind of is a bit of a troublemaker, but I don't think the author has given us any evidence to think that Nick wants to cause trouble. That doesn't seem to be what he wants. I think he just likes using these things and kind of trying to be funny, like a class clown, right? We also learned a little bit about Janet Fisk. At first she seemed embarrassed, but now she's kind of going along with things. So she kind of likes to do some of the similar activities that Nick does, and they seem to have like a good friendship. Now, if you may have heard some things during the video, it's because this one wouldn't leave me alone. This is Jax. He is obsessed with this ball, and he won't leave me alone until I take it and throw it. Jax is about, I think, 3 years old now. He's a standard poodle. Weighs probably about 55 pounds. Looks a lot heavier than he actually is because it's all just fluff. Just a big hairball. So, as I make these videos, I have 4 dogs, you guys. You guys know that. You may hear different sounds. It's most likely one of them. Probably this one. And there he goes. All right, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed chapter 1 of Andrew Clement's Sprindle. See you guys later.